Hi, I'm Angela Poach, and I'm a registered professional counselor and a certified life coach. And today we're going to be talking about what is Team CBT. Team CBT is a cutting edge, evidence based method for the treatment of depression, anxiety, troubled relationships, habit addictions, and more. It's a structured approach that relies heavily on cognitive behavior therapy, and it was created by Dr. David Burns, renowned psychiatrist from Stanford University, who's also a best-selling author, has authored several books, including Feeling Good, which was done in the 80s and sold millions of copies as a best-selling book for the treatment of depression, been used to be clinically proven to treat depression, in fact, better than medication. David was really disappointed that medication was just like marginally better than placebo. In fact, he'd been given the opportunity to do a bunch of research, been given a grant, and he worked with Aaron Beck and realized CBT was just much more effective, and he wanted to develop that further. And there's always testing going on with this kind of research-based therapy. And so every time he found something that worked, he'd add it. When it didn't work, he'd kind of throw it away. And some things work sometimes, but not others. So then you keep that in your bucket and you're like, okay, well, sometimes I'm going to pull that out and try it. And if it doesn't work, no problem. I've got another tool in the bucket. The framework of Team CBT is that it is a structure in which to do therapy and life coaching in a very effective way, while it still includes a soft, flexible nature of therapy. So this allows for more diverse practitioners to enter the field of psychotherapy. For example, people like myself who wouldn't normally get into therapy or become a psychologist. For one thing, I'm ADHD, I'm, symptom on the spectrum, and I'm quite a linear thinker. Like when I say linear, we call it like left brain, which is sort of a misnomer, but just really analytical. It's got to be like, show me the proof, show me the proof. And really subjective material that can be very difficult. Well, how do you prove it? And plus, you can't ethically do, like placebo type testing when it comes to mental health. Kind of scary to try and say, okay, let's make a bunch of people depressed and like have a control group, and yeah, not going to work. So I kind of steered away. I like the idea of understanding the mind and like neurophysiology. I kind of took a little bit of psychology in college. But really for me, it's kind of, but this approach, because it's structured, because it's based on evidence, because we're testing before and after every session, I'm checking in with clients. I don't need to assume I know everything. I don't have to guess, but I can throw out ideas. I can kind of make estimations and then check in with the client. I love this approach. It just works so well for me. And it works really well for my clients who are like me. And I really enjoy working with clients who have ADHD. We tend to really hit it off, and we tend to use a lot of humor in our therapy, and it just works really well. But it also works well, like I say, it's very diverse. I have colleagues who really love. They're very soft spoken. They're very empathetic and warm, and they love working with grief and depression, and they just they can really relate with the client, and so there's that beautiful flexible nature of Team CBT. So Team CBT also honors the client's value system while empowering them to change their negative thinking and behaviors. This is another reason I love this methodology versus some of the other things I've seen in psychology, because we have different faiths, we have different walks of life, we have different cultural norms and ideas. And Team CBT honors all of those. There's just the embraces various faiths. You don't have to think a certain way to fit in. Whereas I've noticed when I've been in groups with other therapists who are not Team CBT oriented, they can be quite pushy about what they think is okay. They can kind of encourage their clients to try and give up certain values that they think are restrictive because they think that's what's causing the problem. And Team CBT doesn't do that. You can be as conservative or liberal or, whatever you want whatever is appealing to you and your faith and your culture, and still have great mental health. So love it. That's one of the reasons why I love TEAM-CBT. Okay, let's look at 3 key team philosophies. So number 1 is called death of the therapist ego. And there's some parts to this, like practice what you preach, fail as fast as you can, sitting with open hands. And these are different terms that you will learn if you do TEAM-CBT. But basically, it's this idea that, we're on this journey together. So it's not perfection, but there is this concept of, if I haven't dealt with my own fear of heights, how am I going to be helping someone else with their fear of heights? And I need to, kind of figure that out for myself, and be willing to go down that road, and maybe even see my own failures in how I approach it. So, willing to do the self work. So that practice what you preach, that's the self work. And as TEAM-CBT practitioners, we really encourage that. We encourage therapists to do self work when they're practicing these tools, whether it's in practice groups or in training. So practice what you preach. The fail as fast as you can, that's embracing this idea that there is this bucket of tools, and we don't know for sure what's going to work with what client. Now, that can be hard on the ego. If you pull out 10 tools and you still haven't had success with a client, you're like, like, which one's going to work? Why haven't I figured out the right tool yet? So there needs to be this death of ego. Again, we're going to figure it out. Maybe it's tool number 11. Maybe it's tool number 18. I don't know. We're going to figure it out. We have to fail as fast as we can. And that third piece of this first part of death of the therapist ego, sitting with open hands. Now, this is referring to the idea that it is not up to me to change you. Even if you've come to me and paid me and you're like, I don't want to be depressed, or I don't want to be anxious. But if I try to do the work for you, you're not going to find healing. And so a lot of therapists get compassion fatigue, and they work really hard, and they see clients week after week after week, month after month after month, and they're carrying the weight of their client on their shoulders, and it's not doing the client any good. It kind of feels good though, as therapists, why we do it. I've done it. Like, it feels good. Like we care about our clients, and we want them to be successful. We want to help them, and we don't want to say, it looks like this is working for you right now. Because that seems really weird to say, like, oh, well, depression's working for you, or anxiety's working for you right now. But sitting with open hands is really that concept that, what? I'm here when you need me. Come on back. What? There's no judgment here. If this is working for you, if what you're doing is working, you've come to me, you seem like you want help. Here's how I work, but I totally get it if that's not right for you. And it's a very non-judgmental approach. The second of the 3 key team philosophies is we treat people, not disorders. And this is a very unique approach. It's becoming more common, I think, in the modern age, but it can seem really weird. Like, well, doesn't every therapist treat people? I mean, isn't that what we do? But the reality is the DSM-5 and this idea of diagnostics has really permeated, especially in North America, because of insurances. You have to label in order to get the funding, and there's just certain things. Also, labels are really handy for, and actually we do use labels because there can be, I say I'm ADHD, because they can really helpful in discussing certain things, understanding each other, because one word can really paint a big picture. But what we mean is that I'm not treating anxiety. I'm not treating the depression. I'm not trying to get rid of the depression in my client. And that is a unique approach. Normally it's like, okay, we diagnose, we're like, okay, you have depression. Let's treat this depression. Let's get you free from this depression. Our approach is, okay, you have some symptoms that look like depression. And maybe we even, I know there are many team therapists who do diagnostics, especially in the US. I think all of the ones in the US do, because they have to in order for their things. But it's kind of like a side thing, like, okay, yeah, this is what you have. All right, fine. Let's work on you. How can you feel better? And the focus is on finding those coping skills, finding those truthful, healthy thinking thoughts that are going to empower the person to have joy. And so we're treating the person. We want the person to find that awareness and fulfillment. And we're not so much worried about, how depressed are they and have we fixed the depression. And this also comes across in terms of the tools, because over and over and over, I hear people both outside of team therapy as practitioners, as therapists, and also clients that they're like, do you treat people with abuse? Do you treat, like, they think that there's somehow certain treatment that's good for certain disorders. And there's, maybe some truth to that. There's some research that points to that. It's not super solid. And unfortunately, it's just, people write articles and they get followings and groupies thinking, oh, this particular treatment methodology works really well for this disorder. But unfortunately, it's just not that cut and dry, because as people, we think differently. And so what works for me, even though I have ADHD and anxiety, may not work for somebody else who has anxiety and ADHD, right? Like, we might have the exact same diagnoses, and yet, examine the evidence is one of the tools I use. That might work really well for me, but for them, it doesn't work so good. They need a different tool. So really important for us to not get caught up in just like, oh, well, we need these specific tools. Now, I will say the caveat to this is, we use certain groups of tools for certain, what we call conceptualization. So if we're working on depression, anxiety, or anything with mood, we use a certain set of tools. If we're working on relationships, we use another set of tools, not always different, sometimes they're the same. But it's a different kind of structure. And then habit and addictions, we use another set of tools. So it's true that we still, again, labels can be helpful, but we're treating the individual person. Okay, number 3 is client collaboration. So this is another key team philosophy. It's not what's wrong with the client, but what's right with them that we want to embrace. What is good going on with this client, instead of like looking at all the flaws, like, oh, well, depression does this and this and this and this, or anxiety does that and that. But really, we want to dig deep into, what is it about this person? What does their perfectionism say about them that's beautiful and awesome? Well, they have high standards. They want to achieve well. They're humble. They see themselves flawed. These are really important character traits, and we want to hold on to these values. So really, we're not trying to fix a broken person, but rather empower them and give them more tools to have this abundant, healthy coping skills. Another reason we focus on client collaboration is that the client is the one, if they can experience the effort, they're going to experience the healing. And so homework is a big part of this. I say homework, we say the word homework. And it basically, it's the readings, it's the worksheets, it's the doing the work in between sessions, it's the work during the sessions. A lot of times I'll kind of wait and I'll sit kind of quietly. I've had clients say to me, oh, you're making this really hard, aren't you? But I guess that's your job. Because I don't offer suggestions and advice right away. And sometimes I give, some collaboration. It is collaborative, right? But it's not like, I'm the expert and they're the weak little poor person that needs, me to tell them, set them straight. So client collaboration is a big part of team philosophy. Well, what specifically is TEAM-CBT? It's an acronym. T means testing, which is rapid, reliable, session-by-session assessment of both symptoms and therapeutic relationship. E is for empathy, accurate, compassionate understanding of the client's unique problem or situation. A is for assessment, or agenda setting, or assessment of resistance, is the newer way of saying it, where we pinpoint resistance, boost motivation, and figure out what is getting in the way of change. And M is method, where there's hundreds of tools with over 12 modalities. All right, well, let's look at more in depth at T, at testing. So testing in team, as I mentioned, is this rapid, reliable, session-by-session assessment of both symptoms and therapeutic relationship. So why testing? Well, research has shown us that therapists can't read minds. In fact, they tested some therapists and they were finding out that their percentage of being accurate to how they thought their clients were feeling were pretty low. In fact, recent research suggests that therapists who test before and after every session, they are 2.5 times more effective than therapists who don't. And this is regardless of the modality that they use in treatment. And so various surveys can be helpful. There's all kinds. The brief mood survey, we call it the BMS in TEAM-CBT by Dr. David Burns, has been tested for reliability at Stanford. So it's the one we use as TEAM-CBTs, but there are others. David also has an easy diagnostic survey, and that goes along with the DSM-5 to help get those labels, those diagnostic tools. But we have other testing methods as well. We do an intake session, and those are forms. There's like a suicide interview, other screening forms. So there's lots of ways to get onto paper, to get some data, some quantitative information about a very subjective subject. And this is really gives us the tool for moving forward. So here on the screen, you can see a sample of a brief mood survey. Again, this will look different in the electronic versions and things like that, but this is found in the electronic tool package. And if you're wanting to get into TEAM-CBT, you're going to want the tools that David offers on his website. And certainly you can get a hold of me if you're not sure how to do that, but it's feelinggood.com/shop. And there's lots of tools there. Another aspect of testing is, well, I said there's before and after surveys. Again, there's the after surveys, we call it the evaluation of therapy session. So we do a brief mood survey and the evaluation of therapy session after a session. And some of the research that David did, that therapists are only in the 10% in ballpark. Student researchers completed the same skills at the same time as their clients, but asked to guess how the patients were feeling based on very extensive interviews they had just completed, okay? And the results in this particular one were very similar to other findings from Thatcher, and that showed that the reports of patients and researchers was extremely low. Okay, the next part of TEAM is E, it's empathy. So empathy is this therapeutic regard. It's the, really engaging with the client. And we want an accurate, compassionate understanding of the client's unique problem or situation. And it's empathy is not unique to TEAM. This is one of the areas where empathy is very important in many different modalities, but it's a little bit off to the side in cognitive behavior therapy, or even, REBT and solution focused therapy. It kind of gets dismissed a little, as well as, it's not really important. Client's paying, client wants to come, client says they're excited to work, client says they want to crush this. And so, we really need that connection. So team empathy is slightly different from standard empathy. It follows, again, some structure. So we use the 5 secrets of effective communication, which helps to avoid some pitfalls. And there's some pitfalls that happen in maybe traditional empathy and can happen in team. We have to be aware of them and try not to, we fail as fast as we can. When we notice we're doing them, we kind of regroup. So I've definitely found myself doing some of these. So some of the pitfalls are cheerleading, advice giving, validation lectures, like, oh, you have, you poor thing, you have every right. This is, common in people with abuse, blah, 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 in this long story, right? And directing the conversation versus the client leading. This is a tough one for especially therapists who've been doing it a long time and have a lot of education, because they really have been told they're the expert and that clients don't really know what they need. And so I often will hear in training groups, well, yeah, but what if you think a client, and the reality is there are times where as someone who's been doing this for a while, we see some mistakes the client is making, no question, or we see some red flags and we want to bring that out with the client. That's very important to do. And so you need to follow your training. I'm not suggesting that we just throw at everything, but sometimes we can do this too much or too often, or in situations where probably don't need to. So we want to make sure the client is leading, even when we see there's some things we want to address. We're still doing that from the framework of the client's in charge, but I'm noticing some things that I need to express. And so we will use the 5 secrets in order to do that. So the 5 secrets of effective communication are disarming technique, thought and feeling empathy, or we might say reflective and active listening, I feel statements or self-disclosure, stroking or affirmation, respect, and inquiry or questions. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail on how to do these. They are challenging. They sound really simple. But I will say disarming technique is finding the truth in what the client is saying or the person is saying. And that may seem pretty easy because you don't really know what's going on the other side. So you can kind of just affirm the client. Where this becomes difficult is where there might be a rupture in the therapeutic relationship. And now you have to, repair with the client. And actually, those are the best moments ever. And in TEAM, that's our motto, death to the therapist's ego is, you know what? When we actually have a disconnect between us and the client, we're not getting perfect empathy scores at the end of a session. We're like, oh, this is going to be a great moment of connection because we all know we connect better after a moment of tension. How do you think movies are made? Everything's based on this tension, building of the tension. And then we finally get it. We finally get each other. So even in a therapeutic relationship, that's really important. That's when disarming technique can be more difficult. The client is like, well, you weren't listening to me. And you're thinking, man, I didn't get a word in edgewise. All I was doing was listening. It can be really hard to find the truth in what the client is saying. So disarming technique, finding the truth in what they're saying. Thought and feeling empathy. We're very specific about this. We want to use the client's words and we don't want to embellish and add a bunch of stuff, like, all our lingo from psychology. We want to really be true to what the client said and use their words back. Now, this isn't parroting, and green TEAM-CBT therapists tend to like parrot back word for word. And it's true, you can actually read sometimes what the client said. And I have done that where I read what the client said and they're like, oh, you totally got it. And they don't even know that that's exactly what they said. But you wouldn't do that over and over and over and just parrot back what they're saying because it gets annoying. And I've had a client tell me that too. And so we want to make sure you're using all 5 of these secrets, not just parroting back word for word everything the client says. Feeling empathy is the part where we do some guessing, but we're going to wrap it up with some inquiry. We're going to make sure we're on the right track with the client. I feel statements. This might be another area where traditional therapists may be a little bit concerned. Isn't there this barrier, this therapeutic wall that we don't want to cross? And so these do need to be appropriate. Obviously, we're not going to go on and on about our children and our husband and our relationship with our husband when we're talking to our client. But they can be very simple, like, yeah, I get where you're coming from, man. I had some anxiety. I remember one time I was watching my dad with his backhoe and my stomach went up into my throat, and the physical symptoms are so strong. I can really imagine that you're really struggling with those physical symptoms. Did I understand you right? So just sort of this little tidbit and then getting right back onto client focus. So the I feel statement is not there to direct the attention to me as the therapist, but rather to show the client that I am there with them and I'm walking this journey with them. Stroking is the idea of conveying respect. This can be done in many different ways. It can be like little things like, I'm really excited to work with you. I think you're doing a great job with your homework. Again, stroking, want to make sure it's really specific, but I'm not going to try and teach you all the 5 secrets. Just wanted to give you a bit of an overview. And I love that inquiry is part of the 5 secrets and part of empathy, because in my training, we were told questions are not empathy. And that was really drilled into us. That's not empathy. But the way we do it in the 5 secrets, it most certainly is empathy. And in fact, there are times where I have to stop myself and do a little more inquiry because I've kind of been told, don't say too many questions. But if it's done right, it can really build the therapeutic bond. So inquiry is absolutely fundamental to building empathy, in fact. All right, now we're down to the A in TEAM-CBT. T, testing. E, empathy. A, assessment. So this is the assessment of resistance, or it used to be called agenda setting. So you'll hear that in the old podcast, or might see it in the ebook. And this is where we pinpoint resistance. We're going to boost motivation and figure out what is getting in the way of change. So clients, if they could just change, they would. I mean, they wouldn't even come to us. And it's really important for us to pinpoint what's going on. Where's this resistance? There's this bit of a Freudian idea that there's this, we kind of have this, we don't want to change. And that's true. It's reality. It's human nature. We, even though clients are coming, paying good, hard earned dollars, they still can have and will have resistance. And if we don't address that in a very open and honest dialogue with the client, it will get in the way of methods. In the assessment of resistance structure, we offer an invitation asking the client, do they want to get to work? Then we get really specific. We ask them for a moment in time. Well, when did you experience this? And we, who, what, where, when, very specific moment in time. And then we do a miracle cure. So we're trying to ask them, what do they want to work on? What specifically? And do I have the tools to give you that? What's on the menu? Then we offer them what we call a magic button. Well, hey, if we could push a button, ma'am, and all these negative thoughts and feelings went away, and you were just like, you walked away euphoric, would you push that button? And of course, most of the time they say yes. And then we may or may not do an acid test here, we might do it somewhere else. These aren't always in this order, but pretty close to this order. Acid test is, are the client really willing to change, even though the circumstances may not change? They might still be looking at house foreclosing and bankruptcy, but would they want to feel peace and joy regardless if they lose their home? So kind of an acid test. And then we go into this positive reframing where we're positively reframing some of the things that we normally see as negative, like depression and anxiety, like sadness and anger and fear, and even these like negative thoughts that they're having. So, an example might be, we'll take the house foreclosing and be like, well, what are some of the advantages to feeling anxious? Well, it helps me to try and figure out ways if I can stop the foreclosure. It motivates me. It's protective. It's honest and realistic. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do afterwards. Why wouldn't you feel anxious? Totally makes sense. That's really realistic. Shows that I'm being honest with myself. Maybe I feel inferior and defective because my house is foreclosing, and it shows I'm willing to take responsibility. I'm not blaming the bank. It was some mistakes that I made, which shows that I have integrity. And we just we actually spend quite a bit of time here to unpack this, but that's kind of a flavor of what it's like. This what are the core values that the client has? We want to get those out and onto paper and show how some of that drives the emotions. We have emotions for a reason. There's a reason for them. They're not just like random things. As all of a sudden you're anxious, right? We have a reason, and we want to unpack that. And once the client is really like, yeah, I can see all these really positive things about depression, anxiety, feeling anger, guilt, inferiority. And then we kind of do this, we call it a pivot question. We're like, well, with all these good things, why would you want to change? Sounds like this makes sense. Of course you'd be anxious if your house is foreclosing. Why would you want to change? And of course, often the client will say, well, it's just too painful. It's too much. It's debilitating. I'm getting to the point where I'm actually not able to plan ahead, and I'm actually precipitating this foreclosure. Like, it doesn't have to happen. There's things I could do maybe, but I'm being debilitated by the anxiety. And so we're like, okay, sounds like you're ready to get to work. Well, maybe we could dial it back. This is the magic dial. And maybe we could hold on to all these positive values that you've already mentioned and all the benefits to the anxiety and the feeling inferior. But what if we can dial it back so it didn't feel so intense? And then we want to address process resistance. Now, I do this usually in my 15-minute consultation. I do it again in intake. I do it all over my website, but sometimes we'll do it here too, where, okay, well, there's going to be some things you're going to need to do to get better and feel better. And are you willing to do those? Like with anxiety, you're going to have to face your fears. And with depression, you're going to have to do readings and your homework, even when you don't feel like it. Are you ready for that? And so we deal with that in process resistance. And there's some tools we use for that as well. So we talked about testing, empathy, assessment. Now we're getting to the M in TEAM, and that is methods. So there are over 100 tools that we use from over 12 modalities. psychodynamic, Rogerian, attachment theory, CBT is heavy influence. There's mindfulness, prayer, other spiritual tools. There's interpersonal tools, exposure, response prevention, EMDR. I mean, the list is endless. You can use pretty much any tool if it's appropriate. We want to find out what works for the client and to not get stuck on a favorite one that we like. And I'm going to be honest, there are a few that I tend to go to first that tend to work most of the time, at least 50% of the time. So I always try those first. And I like them and they work well for me. And if they work well for me, quite often I can help navigate that through with the client. But I know that there's others, and sometimes we have to go through and dive into other methods. All right, well, that was a quick overview of TEAM, TEAM-CBT. Resources, where do I go to get more information on TEAM-CBT? Well, first of all, you can go to davidfeelinggood.com. That's his website. He has free podcasts and blog articles, lots of great stuff. There's over 250 some odd podcasts on different topics. You can search for different podcasts. There's a list of podcasts. And David also has workshops throughout the year. Many of them are virtual and online, at least they have been for the last 2 years. And I imagine they will be continuing to do some of those, even when we go back in person moving forward. So I encourage you to, again, he'll have those workshops listed on his website. They're also his workshops are also listed on the feelinggoodinstitute.com website. I highly encourage you to go to that website. I am affiliated with the Feeling Good Institute. I'm a clinician there. And there's some great training. There's some free videos. And there's a course by Dr. Jill Levitt. That's a beginner course, gets you your level 1 certification. Excellent self-paced video course that you can take. So I highly recommend that one. If you haven't had any influence of TEAM yet, that's the course to take. I have a Monday practice group on Mondays. You can email me if you'd like to know more information. It's currently, I held it at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. It's every week, it's free. I also have some paid groups that are a little more in depth and proactive. I do one-on-one consulting. There's also many TEAM-CBT clinicians who do consulting. And I would mention so many here. I love Tyann. She's got some great free trainings. You can go to her website. There's Daniel Minty. There's so many, but you'll find those trainers on the feelinggoodinstitute.com. You can also do a Google search for TEAM-CBT trainer and find even more. There's also team trainers in certain countries as well. So again, reach out. Once you're level 1, you get to join the listserv. We call it the team listserv. And from there, you can punch your information in and try and contact other people. And you're just opened up to a whole world of team therapists. So again, I highly encourage you to do that course by Dr. Jill Levitt that will get you your level 1. You'll get onto the team listserv. So that was TEAM-CBT in a nutshell. I hope this video was informative and you enjoy it. And I encourage you to learn more about TEAM-CBT.